Hi everyone. Today we will be debating against information technology improving the lives of people in developing countries. The team members are listed below. What is information technology? The dictionary defines information technology as the study or use of systems for storing, retrieving, and sending information. The top four arguments that we will be presenting are the risks to information security and privacy, political motives and threat to democracy, economic inequality, culture fitting in developing countries. With the rapid expansion of information technology, developing countries are more susceptible to bioattacks and cyber terrorism. Countries like Brazil, Mexico, Malaysia, Nigeria, and the Philippines have multiple nationwide scale cyber attacks in the past years. According to a study conducted by Kroll, a risk consulting firm based in New York, 92% of Mexican companies are victims of cyber attacks. These cyber attacks are focused on banking, telecommunications, military, and intellectual properties. The consulting company has started that the attacks have rose from 82% in 2016 to 92% in 2017, mostly resulting in data elimination. The second most frequent attacks are on stealing confidential information, which includes employee records on both physical and virtual assets. Another instance of breaching information security in developing countries happened in 2016. Hackers were able to withdraw almost 1 billion US dollars through Bangladesh banks. This is one of the most sophisticated cyber attacks in history, and it was executed through developing countries such as Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines. For developing countries with mediocre information systems, the constant threat of cyber attack poses great risk to national security and its people. Stolen information could be used for illegal activities and makes investigations more difficult to conduct. For example, in the Bangladesh bank heist, the federal government are still investigating the incident after 2 years and still cannot identify the perpetrators at this point. The Bangladesh government have lost $1 billion of loanable funds that could be used for local projects. Although privacy and data breach has been a big issue, even for technologically advanced countries, the threat on privacy in developing countries is worse. For example, in 2017, 46 million Malaysian mobile data has been linked to the dark web. This includes phone numbers, serial numbers, and home addresses. Just this year in Philippines, passport information has been allegedly breached and stolen by previous IT contractors. It is not only the government that knows when and where its people are, but also the nefarious individuals that aim to do harm in society. For example, the leaked information above can be used to authenticate credit cards to be used for illegal transactions or even duplicate a person's identity and use it for crime without the original person knowing. For example, recently in Jakarta, Indonesia, three Nigerians were arrested using fake passports. What is interesting here is that the arrested have already flown to Indonesia before being caught. This means that they were previously approved to fly at the origin. Information security is only one of the many reasons why information technology does not improve the lives of people in developing countries. Building modern infrastructures and providing law and economic support to a stronger information security framework could minimize cybersecurity threats.
Speaking of developing countries, we often think of their political environment and democracy, as most of them have adopted a different political structure than the Western world and therefore are considered less democratic. Since the Arab Spring in 2011, people are hoping that by introducing advanced information technologies to the developing countries, it would help push for democratic reform. However, IT do not always have a positive impact on the democratization progress of developing countries. As developing countries are more unstable politically, the ruling regime, mostly autocratic, asserts firm control on the people by all means. Everything in the country is directly controlled by the government in a top-down approach, including infotech. If the government determines that IT endangers their rule, they will be largely restricted or even completely banned from the public. This means even if today we give a developing country the best telecommunication technology, there is no guarantee that the public will have full access to it. Moreover, in such countries, there exists no effective supervisory body that monitors the decisions made by the ruling authorities. Hence, no one can stop the government from restricting public access to the technologies as well as taking advantages of these infotechs to strengthen their control over the people. Let's take North Korea as our example. In our impression, we see North Korea as a closed state with no interaction of any sort between its people and the Western world. It is so falling behind economically and scientifically that people wonder if they actually own technologies like internet, TV, and mobile phone. It is utterly surprising to find out that North Korea has all three. Now that we know those technologies already exist in North Korea, let's find out whether they have a positive impact on the country. Despite that internet is no stranger to North Korea, it is not fully accessible by the public. Actually, most internet users have access to an internet built by the government, with its content censored. So apparently, North Koreans have mastered the technology so well that they have been cloning off the World Wide Web for years. But did it make the country more democratic? No. In fact, the government controls who can access the internet and what they can see. In this way, the public opinions can be easily railroaded to be aligned with the government. Moving on, another shocking fact, 98% of households in North Korea own a TV, based on a study from 2017. With such high coverage rate, let's take a look whether the TV has improved the politics and democracy in the country. What does it mean to have a TV? Many people must have imagined having dinner with the evening news on and learn what has happened in the world. Unfortunately, no. That is not what you get with a TV in North Korea. In fact, as of 2016, there were only 4 channels you can watch, and all of them are state-owned and are media outlets of the government. The programs consist mostly of domestic news, carefully selected international news, and heroic stories that boost nationalism. From time to time, the channels are also used by the government to convey a message to the public, where you can see the iconic lady from their news program.
Many people have argued that TVs are not helping the North Korean people see the world, but are instead turned into a propaganda machine and advantage of the government. Now let's look at mobile phone.
According to a survey from 2011, at that time, roughly 60% of the population in the capital city, Pyongyang, owns a mobile phone. Many of them are smartphones from brands we are familiar with like Apple, Nokia, and Huawei. And the percentage is still rising rapidly. However, since international calls are generally not allowed, both inbound and outbound calls, plus the limited internet access, smartphones did not play an important role in pushing the democratic reform like it did back in the Arab Spring. Another typical developing country is China. Despite the argument that China should no longer be considered as a developing country, as of now, it is still a legitimate developing country. In recent years, China has risen towards the technological frontier in terms of big data and AI technologies. One of the well-known applications is the domestic surveillance system in coordination with the social credit system. It is essentially a massive network of cameras constantly monitoring the public. It is capable of determining the identities of people that are caught in the camera based on the physical and facial features collected at the customs and when boarded a train or flight. The surveillance system is also linked directly with the social credit system, which keeps track of any misbehaviors of an individual. Based on the credit, certain punishments will be given to those with low social credit. Those include and are not limited to, firstly, travel bans. Due to a low credit score, the person will now be banned from purchasing tickets for certain buses, trains, or flights. One famous example is a lady who was banned from going to Beijing via public transportation because she went to Beijing for petition and demonstration, which obviously created troubles for the government. A second punishment is a career restriction. Some people with low credit score will not be employed by any state-owned business or institute, which is both a huge setback for their career given that more than one-third of the businesses is owned by the state. Another even more unreasonable punishment is not placed on those with low credit scores, but on their children. The report shows that some children will be rejected by some of the best schools just because their parents have low credit social scores. The surveillance and social credit system is prepared to be fully launched in 2020. Is one of the world's largest applications of big data and machine learning technologies. However, it does not necessarily bring stability and democracy to the Chinese society. Instead, people's life is now fully monitored by the government agencies. Any misbehavior which is defined and regulated by the government will now lead to unreasonable punishments that creates inequality between citizens. Moreover, China is now exporting its digital surveillance technology to certain developing countries in Africa to help them firmly control their internet space.
The third point is economic inequality, or the poverty gap. Economic inequality is prevalent in many developing countries. With the introduction of information technology in developing nations, it contributes to the economic inequality by making the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. These conditions of these countries allow their governments to monopolize on this industry in the interest of the powerful and the rich. For internet to survive in a country, the state of the physical communications infrastructure is of paramount importance. Many developing nations have limited or no telecommunication networks. For internet to operate, there has to be a minimum level of telecommunication infrastructure. A way to measure this is by using teledensity. Teledensity is defined as the number of telephone lines per 100 people. It is also perhaps the largest constraint, as the average teledensity among developing nations is just a mere 1.5. In very low-income countries like Papua New Guinea, Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, Liberia, and Somalia, the staggering figure is only 0.0001, which is one telephone for every 600,000 people. A recent BBC broadcast on Internet in Africa states that a figure of one telephone per 100 people was given as being average for the African continent. Such circumstances arise to the perfect environment for telecommunications company in developing countries to capitalize and monopolize this lucrative industry. In at least a dozen of African countries, internet services are still provided under the monopoly control of the national carrier who operates under the government wing. Governmental restrictions are common in many developing countries, and several countries have politically motivated policy of making internet access unaffordable to all but commercial users. For example, access to the internet in an African country, Benin, which is subject to tight regulations, costs around $79 a month. Tim Niju, CEO of Ghana's ISP provider, also says that the government controls who can enter the internet marketplace, thus preventing a competitive market while ensuring monopoly is in play. In the world of economics, monopoly market is one of the markets that has the most deadweight welfare loss, causing the poor to pay a lot more than they should have just to access the internet. In conclusion, information technological progress, which leads to the economic development gap or the digital divide, is one of the major factors driving economic inequality across developing countries.
Given how cultures of different developing countries vary so drastically, new technology will certainly not fit in with the culture immediately. As a result, newly introduced technology will not improve lives, but instead work against the community's values, norms, traditions, and beliefs. Le Corbusier, a pioneer in modern architecture, viewed modern design as a standard and that it would not be appropriate to cater to local culture. This forces individuals in developing countries to alter their lifestyle to accommodate information technology. The world is consisted of many countries with different cultures. Cultures are what make us unique and also form as the basis of our virtues and daily social lives. That being said, indigenous communities have a long history of tradition and culture that define them and their uniqueness. These can be religious in nature or rooted in their society. Introducing technology can disrupt these traditions in many different ways. One way is that it distracts people from the importance of these traditions. As technology has created faster moving lifestyles, Many people in developed societies neglect and lose touch with their culture. Another way this can happen is over a long period of time. The indigenous communities might conform to an ideal culture, much like how a lot of countries are becoming westernized as people strive to be more American or European. As cultures become more integrated, people in developing countries lose touch with their culture over time. Another setback of the expansion of IT is the diminishing of native languages. For example, China only allows their official language Mandarin to be taught in school. The concept of an official language came with technological modernization. With such policy, the younger generations in China do not speak their native language, such as Cantonese, Hokkien, Shanghainese, Hakka, etc. This results in loss of languages and rich oral traditions. Some stories and histories are communicated only orally or pictographically to maintain the tradition. According to the World Health Organization, quality of life is defined as the individual's perception of their position in life in the context of the culture and value systems in which they live and in relation to their goals. Thus, technology declines context of culture and does not improve the quality of life in the developing countries. Cultural uniqueness is lost in favor of homogenization. Technology makes popular culture spreads easier than ever before. Different cultures are powerful experiments in seeing how else a society could work and provide examples to challenge existing norms and status quo. They provide inspiration for changes within any given culture. Culture homogenization results in less diversity of ideas and blandness and uniformity. On the other hand, a universal culture that draws heavily from American Western culture is formed through information technology advanced. Hollywood movies is played throughout the globe, including developing countries. This might create an illusion for individuals in developing countries. They could compare their own behavior with the ones in the popular culture. In some sense, this is vulnerability. They could try to find their sense of belonging in the world which beyond their reach in current state. It gives individual unrealistic expectations.
So in conclusion, one of the most dangerous consequences of technology is the breach of information security and privacy. Nowadays, military defense is not only practiced on land, but also in the web. For developing countries embracing the benefits of technology, it is important to keep in mind how it could be used to slow down the country's growth and to harm its people. For political motives and threat to democracy, like any other tools developed by humans, information technology can have a good or bad impact on developing countries. Depending on whom it be used by, how it is used, and what it is used for, if used with goodwill for the people, it will bring a huge improvement in societies in many aspects. However, if governments of developing countries that are politically unstable are in control of this technology, there is no guarantee that it will contribute to democratization of the country and might even be used against the people. For economic inequality, conditions of unstable or poorer developing countries allow the government or telecom companies to capitalize and monopolize this industry, thus straining the economic inequality to an even greater extent. For culture fitting in developing countries, information technology might force people to alter their lifestyle and abandon their own tradition and language. For developing countries, their culture diversity might decrease dramatically in favor of homogenization.
In conclusion, these are the reasons why we think information technology does not improve the lives of people in developing countries.